Llévate más de lo que esperas todos los días con el nuevo McValue en McDonald's. Ahora puedes comprar uno y sumarle otro por $1. Así que cuando tu equipo favorito enfrente a sus rivales, enfrenta a tus antojos con $5 Meal Deals. Y si estás corriendo para alcanzar el desayuno, corre al app para llevarte ofertas antes del cutoff. Tú decides, y con McValue, tu decisión siempre rinde más. Precios y participación pueden variar. BOGO $1 válido para un producto de igual o menor valor. Debe estar registrado en Rewards para ofertas en el app.
Hi, this is Carl Reiner, working hard to promote his new book, I Remember Me, and where better to promote it on the Dr. Sky Show. A doctor. He's a real doctor. I have never spoken to a doctor who interviews so brilliantly. It's because he's got a degree in, what is it, doctor?
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, as we continue to move through time and space. Always great guests here on the Dr. Sky Show. And as you know, ladies and gentlemen, from time to time, we're honored by having celebrity guests from all different walks of life, and today is certainly no exception. Today, the great Carl Reiner, an American actor, film director, producer, writer, and comedian. He's won 12 Emmy Awards and 1 Grammy Award during his illustrious career. We have Mr. Reiner here, and we're grateful for his time, talking about his recently issued memoirs entitled I Remember Me. Folks, some 55 chapters talking about his life and all the great people that he's come across in this most phenomenal life. Sir, welcome to the show. It's a privilege and honor to have you. You're 91 years young, and from what I got out of your book, you're just raring to go for the next 91.
Well, I'm trying. As a matter of fact, you caught me while I was tweeting.
I love it. I got to read some of your tweets, and tell us, the tweets have become a pretty staple part of your life.
You know something? I'm going to give you a first. I just tweeted this about 4 minutes ago. There are 2 new tweets. There's the 79th new Reiner dictionary word. I'm writing a new dictionary with new words. People's, the old dictionary is just, it's been done. So
right.
This new word is vortexantarctica.
Wow, that's a tough.
It's a noun. It's the rare hemispheric condition caused by tornadoes spawned in divergent weather zones. Vortexantarctica.
Oh, that's interesting, and I followed your tweets so well, Mr. Reiner. The first one, to tell you that I'm paying attention, as you know better, is Odd Vark, and you describe it as what? An odd-looking Vark, 82 BC.
Well, I got another one I just finished, and I don't know if this is, maybe you can help me. It's decormative. DECORUMTIV. Decormative.
Wow, you got me on that one. That's
unsolicited advice given to a professional room designer. Decormative.
And very interesting book. Now, when is that book possibly coming out?
Oh, I don't know. We've only got 79. I think I have to do, what is the unabridged dictionary? Thousands?
Hundreds of thousands, Mr. Reiner.
The Webster's, I'm just looking at Webster's, there's 150,000 entries, so 150,000. So I have to last another year at least.
Well, I'm sure you will. Talking about I Remember Me, I find this fascinating. 55 chapters written from the heart, sir. I learned so much about you. I learned so much about your children, of course, Rob, Annie, Lucas, your lovely wife, who sadly passed on, as we all know, in 2008. But I got to salute you, sir. 65 years married, and I'm sure still madly in love with Estelle. Tell me a little bit about the origin of writing I Remember Me.
Well, I had written a while ago, about a couple of years ago, I wrote a thing called My Anecdotal Life, where I decided I might want to write a bio, and then I said, I don't want to leave. I just want to still be funny, so I picked out on particular stories that tickled me that were funny, mainly funny, and I finished with it. And then I realized, as I'm walking around the block every day, stories would pop into my head. I said, I got to put that down. Yes. As I kept putting them down, I realized I had to do this, and the thing that really triggered me is I got a letter, and I think the first thing in the book is about my bar mitzvah speech. I got a letter from this woman, Mrs. Passarelli, and she said she found this little speech written in beautiful handwriting. My father was an engraver, and it was a bar mitzvah speech she had done for her her son, and he had passed away. He was my age.
Oh.
And she found it, but she found my father's name on the back. And she said, "You might like to have this." And I realized that it's the same speech I made a year before. He had written a little bar mitzvah speech for me. And that started me going. I said, my God, that's the beginning. Today I'm a man, and I started with
Absolutely. You become a man. Ladies and gentlemen, if you're just joining us, a living legend here, 91 years young, is an American actor, film director, producer, writer, and comedian. He's won 12 Emmy Awards and 1 Grammy Award during his illustrious career that continues in force. We're talking with none other than Carl Reiner. His new memoir, I Remember Me, 55 chapters. This man, of course, rocks. And ladies and gentlemen, we're so privileged to have you. Mr. Reiner, thank you for spending time with us today and talking all about your life. Let's start with your family. New York City. I'm a native New Yorker myself, born in Jamaica, Queens, and you obviously born in Bronx, New York. Describe to us your early days, your mom, Bessie, and Irving, your father, a watchmaker, and so much more. He was an inventor, too, I understand.
Yes, well, I saw my father every day of my life because he worked. He didn't like working in a jewelry store. The store he worked in was under the elevated train, and they would rumble by, and he would drop things. So I decided to work at home. Some of the time I was 4 or 5 years old, he was in our living room, dining room. We had a 3-room apartment. He sat by a window, and he did his work, and I came home from school every day and sat there. And some of the stories my favorite story of all was when I was 13, I'm sitting on the couch, and my father was a stoic. He never made any other sound of annoyance, or he never cursed. The most that ever came out of him was tisk, tisk, and it came out. That's what you hear. And when I looked up, 2 times I heard it. Once he had a screwdriver had pierced the flesh of his forefinger, right to the tip of his forefinger, and all I heard was and I looked up, and he was thinking about how to get it out. I said, "Don't you pull it out, pull it out." He said, "No, if I pull it out, the thick end of the screwdriver will rip more flesh." So he cut the bottom, pulled it out with the thin part, and bandaged his finger and went back to work. And that was the first test. The second one was my favorite that I wrote about.
Yes.
He said he did the tisk kiss, and I looked up, and he said, "Look at that." I said, "What is that?" He said, he was holding something between his thumb and forefinger. He says, "It's a silver filling. That's been
this is a good chapter."
Yeah, that's been in my tooth for 38 years, he said. I said, "Pa, how could you know how long a silver filling is in your tooth?" He said, "This one I put in myself."
My God.
He actually was like 16 or 18 years old. He was and lived in Czernowitz, Hungary, Poland, and he moved to Vienna when he was 14. I think he was already a master watchmaker. He had when he was 17 or 18, he had two molars that needed filling. He went to a dentist. The dentist hurt him so badly, he said he ran out of the office, screaming with pain, paid the dentist, and he said the second one he was going to do himself. He bought a book. He bought a book on dentistry, found out how to make facets. He bought a book on amalgams, how to make silver and mercury filling.
That's incredible.
And he said, and I wouldn't hurt myself. He says, I drilled. I had all these little drills, and I stopped drilling when I felt pain. It took me a little longer, but he filled the filling. And
Irving Reiner, a very inventive man. That's an amazing story, Carl. You also describe him as an inventor. I mean, you were telling me off air that there's a lot of things that your father actually put together in a very inventive mind. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, one of the things in my book, there's a picture of him playing the violin, and I entitled it Irving Shoots Irving Playing Irving. The shooting Irving is the part that, what is that? Well, he did learn to play a violin by buying a violin when he was 20 years old. He admired the fact his brother took lessons when he was a kid, and he always said he's going to get a violin when he's 20. He bought a violin for $500 that my granddaughter plays today, by the way. And he taught himself to play from a book again. He got a book and did the same with a flute. He played it in little orchestras around New York, and that was, the beginning of his, but now he has this picture of himself playing a violin.
Right.
And what happened is that my father was always a photographer. When he was a kid, he made a pinhole camera for himself. He bought a daguerreotype kind of plate camera, glass plate camera. When took pictures of my mother nursing my brother, which I have to this day, a 100-year-old picture in glass. And he was a photographer, but there was never any pictures of himself because he was always taking pictures of other people. He sat one day and figured out, he's a watchmaker, he made a little device with a spring. He wound up a little device, put it on the camera, gave him 1 minute to get into place, and the camera clicked him he took a picture of himself. So there's and the word Irving shoots Irving, playing Irving. My granddaughter who played the violin, I saw a concert of her. She's, wait, I'll be right with you. I got to get Irving. I said, who's Irving? She said, I call the violin Irving.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.
She had a picture of her grandfather in the case playing that violin.
Amazing story. Our special guest is Carl Reiner, ladies and gentlemen. A privilege and honor to have him today, talking about his memoirs, 55 chapters of his life. Great story. The book entitled I Remember Me. Mr. Reiner, I understand that your brother Charlie's credited for reading something in the New York Daily News about a free dramatic workshop by the WPA, and you show up, and the rest is history. This is a path that changes life.
I had the pleasure of going to Washington one year, and when they gave me the Mark Twain Prize, and the Library of Congress asked me about how I got to be who I am, and I realized, now they say get the people off the government's back.
Yes.
It was the government that made me who I am today. My brother Charlie saw an ad in the paper that said, WPA, the Works Progress Administration,
right.
Free acting lessons at 100 Center Street, New York. I went down there, and I enrolled. I was 17 years old, and I learned reading Shakespeare, things I'd never done before, and that was the beginning of it. That was the government now. And a year later, the NYA Radio Workshop, I got $22 a month for doing 3 radio shows a month, announcing operas and concerts and doing Arch Obler stories and Norman Corwin plays on the air for $22 a month. The government paid actors to learn to act and to be actors. They paid painters to do murals of post offices. They paid professional musicians to learn their craft. And as a matter of fact, when I was 16 years old, the first play I ever saw musical was The Mikado, done by the WPA in high school. It was thrilling to hear a full orchestra and a full cast of characters. All these people would have been out of work. Now they were getting enough money for subsistence. So I say the government not only helped me, but I wouldn't be an actor if it wasn't for the government.
Well, it's a very interesting story, Mr. Reiner, because we don't ever really hear the details like you've given us today. And shifting gears in the short time we have with You're Okay, the love of your life, Estelle, very talented, of course, and amazing story you're about to tell us that I didn't know this until I read your memoirs, of course, that she has the number 4 most memorable of all-time movie lines, of course. This most amazing line, which is, quote, what? I'll have what she's having when Harry met Sally. She's even ahead of Humphrey Bogart with Here's Looking at You, Kid. Tell us about that. That's amazing.
Well, Robbie Reiner was doing When Harry Met Sally in New York, and he had this one line that Billy Crystal came up with, and he called his mother in California. He said, Ma, you got to come to New York. She said, why? She said, this one line I want you to say in Katz's Delicatessen. And she said, Rob, there's 100 actors in New York who can do it. He's not like you, Ma. And then she did the line, and the rest is history. There wasn't an airport we didn't go through. People used to yell at her, I'll have what she's having. But, the interesting thing is he knew his mother could do it. His mother and my wife had a way of saying funny things very shortly. There's one I have in the book that I absolutely loved. When my son was 18 and Annie, my daughter, was 16, she was thinking what she wanted for her birthday, and Robbie said, why don't you get a nose job like your friends did? They were getting pert little noses in Beverly Hills then for their 16th birthday. I said, wait a minute. Her mother has a bigger nose than Annie, and look at the handsome guy she got. And Estelle said, yes, it's not the size of your nose that counts. it's what's in it. At the time, I was doing The Jerk with Steve Martin. I told him, and he laughed. 10 years later, he calls my house. He says, "Can I speak to Estelle?" I said, "What is it? I got to ask you something." He said, "Estelle, you know that line you said, can I borrow it?" He said, "Of course. What do you want it for?" He was doing Cyrano. He was doing Roxanne.
Yes.
And there's Cyrano using Estelle's line. "'Tis not the size of your nose that counts. It's what's in it."
That is funny. See, I never knew that. I mean, I remember Steve Martin in that particular movie. So what a wonderful story, Carl Reiner. I mean, this is an amazing journey, your life. I mean, there's so limited time today to talk about so many of the things. But I got to ask you this. Of all the people that I read about in this book, your close friendship, your bond at the hip there between you and Mel Brooks. I mean, I can't stop laughing every time I see that guy on TV.
Well, it's ongoing. We met in 1950, and it's now 2013, and the last, I don't know how many years, we see each other every day. He comes over every night.
That's
we watch
awesome.
television together. We have dinner together. We fall asleep. No, he falls asleep. I don't fall asleep as much on. I say, wake up, something great on. We're watching Breaking Bad now, and we just love it.
It's amazing. I mean, Mel is something, you know him obviously as a personal friend, but watching and seeing these movies when I was young, like Blazing Saddles, I mean, I never laughed so hard. Just hilarious.
He did a slew of the funniest movies ever made. The producers, Blazing Saddles. Oh, yeah. I mean, it's just, he broke it open for everybody to go crazy.
Carl Reiner, you've been in a number of wonderful movies, too. Another one that I enjoy, and I'm going to promote here, and I'd love you to tell me a little bit behind-the-scenes story. The Russians Are Coming, The Russians Are Coming. Now, here's one that I think is also a phenomenal movie to see.
Well, I love being in that because when I did The Russians Are Coming, I hadn't acted for about 5 or 6 years, not seriously. I was producing and writing the Dick Van Dyke Show for television, and at the very end of last year, Norman Jewison came to my house and he said, "I got this project. I'd like you to be in it." And he offered me the role of the Russian character in it. And I said, "Gee, I used to do that on the shows, fake Russian accent." And I turned it down. And as a matter of fact, I'm glad I did because I got the role of the lead. He came back again. He said, "Would you like to play the lead?" And I'd never played a lead in a movie. And it was the last 2 weeks of the show, of the Van Dyke Show, and Persky and Denoff, Bill Persky and Sam Denoff took over for me, and I was able to go free and become an actor and put my toupee on again and become an actor. And that was a thrill for me. Going up to Mendocino County and just working with Eva Marie Saint and Johnny Winters and the wonderful cast of people in that. It was just a thrill.
Carl Reiner, in more recent movies that I'm sure a lot of folks, the younger generation, recognizes as the Great Ocean series, 11, 12, and 13. They know you, I'm sure, as many.
And by the way, I have to thank Mr. Weintraub for casting me in that because now nobody would know who I am because all the good things I did were 20, 30 years ago. But Saul Bloom happened. The Oceans 11, 12, and 13 happened recently. So when I do go to a store, young kids will say, "Oh, that's the guy from Oceans." So they've kept me alive.
Folks, an amazing moment here in our broadcast history here. We're privileged and honored to have Carl Reiner, once again, an American actor, film director, producer, writer, and comedian. He's won 12 Emmy Awards and 1 Grammy Award during his career. He's kind enough to talk with us today about his new memoir, some 55 chapters of amazing stories, ladies and gentlemen, simply entitled I Remember Me. We're speaking with him from his home in California. Mr. Reiner, there's so many shows that you've been on, and I find in the short time that we have here, I just wanted you to talk a little bit about Dick Van Dyke, the show. We had Rosemary here about a month or two ago, and God bless her. She's also a wonderful actress, as you know, and come to know her. But talk about the Dick Van Dyke Show and Dick Van Dyke.
Well, the Dick Van Dyke Show, after I did the show of shows, I was being offered shows to do situation comedies, and they weren't very good. And my wife, in her infinite wisdom, says, "Why don't you write one?" And I said, I can't write that. And what I did is, and I remember this as if it were yesterday, I was riding home to New Rochelle in my car at the 96th Street exit on the Franklin Delano Roosevelt Drive, and I said to myself, "Hey, Reiner, what piece of ground do you stand on nobody else stands on?" I said, "Well, I live in New Rochelle, and I work in New York." And when I'm in New York, I work on a variety show, and I talk about how it is at home with my wife and kids. When I get home, I talk about the show. I'll write about that. And I wrote a thing called Head of the Family, and it turned out to be a pretty good pilot. And Peter Lawford picked it up. He was going to finance it. And I realized if I did a pilot and I was in it, I better have a Bible. So that summer, I wrote 13 episodes of the Head of the Family. I did the pilot. It was okay. I did it with a very good actress, Barbara Britton and Morty Gunty and Sylvia Miles, but it wasn't good enough, and it didn't sell. So I went about my business, and I wrote a movie for Doris Day called The Thrill of It All. I was at Universal, and I get a call from my agent who was very bothered that he had 13 episodes of what he considered might be a hit show on his desk, just spawned. And he called me in one day. He says, I've given this to Sheldon Leonard and Danny Thomas, who have a production company, and they want to see you. And I came up there and I said, gentlemen, I'm so pleased that you like my material, but I don't want to fail with the same material twice. And Sheldon, I'll do a good impression of him right here. He says, Carl, you won't fail because we'll get a better actor to play you. And he suggested Dick Van Dyke. Went to New York, saw him in Bye Bye Birdie, and found maybe the most talented actor. This man could do anything. At a drop of a hat, he can be 15 different things.
No, Mr. Reiner, you're so correct. And, not to do a selfish promotion here, but in our area and across the country, of course, I watch every night here MeTV with the Dick Van Dyke Show, the reruns. And also, I'm interested to share with the audience, I thought your little promo there with the Shut Up Mel was just absolutely so cool that we all watch here. A wonderful show. And again, sir, we're so honored to have you here as our guest today talking about your life and this interesting memoir. And I understand that the memoir is now going to what? Is it officially now out in book form, I Remember Me?
Oh, yeah. Yes, it's out in book form, and it's all in an e-book. There's an e-book where you can actually press buttons and hear me talk about my kids when they were on Fire Island, pictures that I took with my little 8mm camera, and all kinds of things. And I didn't even know this existed, but these two gentlemen came and made an e-book out of my regular book. Oh, I want a book you can put on the shelf, but they've got a book you can put on an iPad or whatever they call them.
Right, for the new technologies out there.
You call e-books, I guess.
Amazing stuff, Mr. Reiner. I also find a bit of trivia here for Johnny Carson fans, and more specifically, The Tonight Show. Is that correct, sir, that you're the only guest to have appeared with all of the hosts of The Tonight Show in history?
Yeah, as a matter of fact, before The Tonight Show host, there was a guy called Jerry Lester. There were a few people before that I appeared, because I started in television in 1948 when there was ABC had one little office in a horse rink where they did the news, and I did a show called The Fashion Story, where a girl named Marilyn Day sang. I was a comedy photographer, and we did sketches while I was in a Broadway show called Inside USA. I used to get in my cab, change in the cab, and get on stage at 8 o'clock on Broadway. So that was very early television.
Uh-oh. The last cookie.
You can get a new box of cookies in as fast as an hour with Walmart Express Delivery.
Are you my guilty self-conscience?
No, I'm the voice offering you promo code EXPRESS for free delivery on your first order.
Hey, who ate my cookies?
You mean, these cookies?
Order now. Welcome to your Walmart. Promotion valid for first express delivery order. $50 minimum subject to availability. Restrictions apply.
You have some closing stories to share here. We've got about 10 minutes before the top of the hour, and again, our very special guest is none other than Carl Reiner, an American actor, film director, producer, writer, and comedian. He's won, ladies and gentlemen, 12 Emmy Awards and 1 Grammy Award during his continuing career. He's 91 years young, and going back to his life, he's talking to us today about his new memoirs in book and e-form, I Remember Me. Mr. Reiner, as we move to the top of the hour here, I find it so fascinating. You've been in the company of so many people. Hedy Lamarr, tell me a little about her, because there's actually a funny story that you write in one of the chapters. You're trying to light her cigarette. You're both appearing on a game show. Yeah. What happens from there?
Well, I was sitting next to her on the game show. We were both panelists, both looking at the host. I think it was Bill Cullen, and I was being very, gentlemanly. I was paying attention to host, but I noticed in the corner of my eye that she was taking something out of a pocketbook. I assumed she was going to light up a cigarette. In those days, people lit cigarettes. So I reached into my pocket without looking at her, took out a pack of matches, and I struck a match and held it under, didn't even look at it. And she said, "Carl, what are you trying to do? You're going to light my lozenge?" She was putting a lozenge in her mouth.
and you have a match lit underneath her. Oh,
I had held it right before her finger. You want to light my lozenge? It even has alliteration to it. You want to light my lozenge? She was, by the way, she was the single most beautiful woman I have ever seen in my life.
I've heard the story.
And we found out later she was an inventor. The idea that she came up with, she was actually a real inventor of mechanical devices, and the cell phones and all the things we're using today, she has a patent on a thing that was able to make all of this possible.
That's amazing. I mean, never would have thought that such a person would even have any kind of background like that.
But it came out in the paper not too long ago.
Mr. Reiner, you've also described in your book how do I say this, a very big, deep interest and fascination with Judy Garland. You describe a scene there in your memoirs that I think is also very prolific.
Well, I just loved Judy Garland. From the time I was 13 years old, I saw her in a thing called Balboa. She sang Balboa in this. I fell in love with it, literally fell in love with it. Every time I saw that quivering lip, those eyes, I mean, I was smitten. And then when I was 37 years old, she had a program called Celebrity Play. She talked to celebrities, and I remember 2 shows, actually. I was on 2 shows with her, and I remember sitting with her one day, and she said we were the exact same age. And I told her, by the way, how much I did love her, and I said,
sure,
I would have done anything to be your boyfriend. But she said 37, we're both 37, and then she actually said these words to me, "Isn't 37 a shitty age?" Exact words, I quote her. And I said, "Why so?" She says, "Well, 40 is a round number. Everybody says life begins at 40. She says 38 is a nice round number. You're approaching a lovely age, but 37 is nowhere." And I said, she sits in between. And I said, in one of the first things you sang a song to a picture of Clark Gable singing "I'm Just an In-Between." I says, "You're again an in-between."
It's so incredible. And one of the most phenomenal movies, ladies and gentlemen, George Burns, we would be remiss if we didn't, Mr. Reiner, talk about him. You directed Oh, God. I mean, that was one of my favorite movies and still probably is one of the great classics, George Burns. Talk about this relationship. I mean, just amazing.
Well, I just love George Burns because, first of all my life I watched him do without... He was the least sweaty comedian in the history of the world. He never sweated. He was so calm. And when I had him in Oh, God, the 2 things I learned about him, he was the most professional man I'd ever met. He learned the whole script before he did it. So any day I wanted to change scenes, he was ready to do it. Other actors say, wait, I got to learn my lines. He was so perfect. But I must say, one of the things I remember, before I even used him, the first time I met him was with Mel Brooks, and I were doing the 2,000-year-old man at parties. And he was at a party, and he, with a cigar, after we finished, he says, "Is there an album? And did you put this on an album?" And we said, "No." He says, "Put it on an album, or I'm going to steal it." And it was him, and as a matter of fact, it was Edward G. Robinson. After it says, "Yeah, make a play out. I want to play the 1,000-year-old man on Broadway." I said, "He's 2,000. I can play any age," he said. And it was Steve Allen who said, "Hey, fellas, take my..." He had a studio called World Pacific. He says, "Why don't you go there and wail for a couple hours?" And it was Steve Allen who actually made us put the 2,000-year-old man on record. But I remember that was George Burns was the one who suggested we put it on record.
Mr. Reiner, it's an amazing journey that you've shared with our audience here, and I want to salute you, sir, for all the stories that you have in there. A most amazing life that continues positively, and I say this, sir, with no apologies. I've talked to so many folks that are in their 70s and 80s, and you sound like you're just, 35 years old and very positive with energy. And I really do appreciate your time talking about this. I wanted to close, if it's okay by you, sir, just to read a quote, and I think it's so apropos, and if you could describe the quote. And the quote is this: "Inviting people to laugh at you while you're laughing at yourself is a good thing to do. You may be the fool, but you are the fool in charge. I think it sums up so much.
Hey,
and
by
course,
the way, that is, I'm going to tell you something about that. I don't think it's ever been done before. You see that quote? That quote comes from My Anecdotal Life. I was looking in other books I've written. I looked for a quote from, Mark Twain or De Rochefoucauld or Oscar Wilde, Orson Welles, somebody, and I couldn't find a quote. So for My Anecdotal Life, I put that quote in My Anecdotal Life. You know where that quote comes from?
Where, sir?
The book itself. I wrote that it's inside the book someplace as something I happen to write. So in that book, I quote myself. I said it, I do the quote, and at the bottom it says, "From My Anecdotal Life" by Carl Reiner. Now I did another book, and I quote myself, quoting myself from another book that I quoted myself.
And I'm sure that you'll be continuing to continue on and tweet, right?
Yes.
There you go. Mr. Carl Reiner, it's a privilege and honor. I want to thank you. And if you're kind enough, sir, as we come to the top of the hour here, as you know, sir, in radio, we'd like to just have you hold on the line just for a moment, off air. But, ladies and gentlemen, a wonderful opportunity here to share the life, albeit a short interview, so much in the 55 chapters that Carl Reiner, our special guest, is sharing with the world. His life, continuing strong at 91. He just celebrated his 91st birthday on March the 20th. And, sir, in memory of your wonderful wife, Estelle, and a salute to your children, Rob, Annie, and Lucas, I want to thank you, sir, for being our special guest here on our radio show today. I'm Steve Cates. Dr. Sky will be right back on the other side of the top of the hour with more and phenomenal guests. Thank you, Mr. Carl Reiner. Well, sir, I'm just flabbergasted.
I had a great time. You guys are terrific.
Well, thank you. And
you guy is terrific.
You guys. I love it. Just wondering, sir, if you might just do this little, and you're the pro at this. I just wanted to ask in general terms. I'm Dr. Sky, so something
yes.
I would say, hi, this is Carl Reiner, and just tell me a little bit about yourself, not that people don't know you, and tell me the tie-in with your book and maybe something, and you're listening to the Dr. Sky Show.